taken to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship, and I'm delighted to have been able to secure this, my first lead Westminster debate on such an important topic. As the COVID pandemic continues to threaten people's health and livelihoods, honourable members from across the House have rightly been highlighting sectors of the economy which remain at particular risk. I applied for this debate to highlight one such sector, the arts and culture. In March, theatres closed their doors. Gig venues and clubs across the country turned off their sound systems, and museums and galleries turned off the lights. Some now have reopened, and with social distancing measures and other restrictions in place. Many in my own constituency, the commercial theatres, remain unable to reopen because of the simple fact that it's not financially viable to operate within current restrictions. I hope that over the course of this debate, honourable members and myself will be able to convince the government and the public of why these businesses are vital to our local communities and worthy of ongoing support. I am keen that other honourable members play their part in this debate, as I'm acutely aware that when I speak on these issues, representing the cities of London and Westminster, I'm often and easily accused of being London-centric. I hope, though, that through our contributions, we will be able to show that the arts and cultural sector contributes massively to local economies up and down the country. I'm incredibly proud of the vibrant arts and culture offer in my constituency. From Theatreland to iconic live music venues such as Ronnie Scott's, the 100 Club and Heaven, to the Barbican Centre, the Royal Albert Hall, the Royal Opera House and the Coliseum. I hope honourable members will forgive me if I reel off some statistics to support the argument that arts and culture is vital to our economy. In 2019, 18,000 performances across West End theatres attracted over 15 million audience members, providing a gross revenue of £800 million. In 2018, the GVA, gross value added, in the West End alone, of arts, museums and galleries, was over £1 billion. Across London, it is estimated that there are 97,000 jobs in music, performance and visual arts. And there are further over 17,000 in museums, galleries and libraries. Visit Britain research suggests that a quarter of tourists who come to London come specifically for its cultural offer. These statistics, I hope, show the direct impact that arts and culture have supporting the wider local economy. Modelling shows that for every £1 spent in theatres, for example, £5 is spent in the wider local economy, bars, restaurants, shops. Although theatres, live music and cultural venues play a vital role within the ecosystem of the West End, it is the same across the UK. Figures provided by UK Music suggest that for every £10 spent on a ticket in a live music venue is worth £17 to the local economy. One gig by Ed Sheeran in Ipswich last year brought in £58 for every pound spent by the local council to put on the concert, with a net value of over £9 million to the local economy. So what impact has COVID-19 had, and what impact will it continue to have? The Heart of London Business Alliance, Holber, a business improvement district in my constituency, is about to publish a report entitled The Economic Benefits of the West End, the Heart of London Arts and Cultural Sector to the Wider Economy and the Case for COVID-19 Support. They have been kind enough to provide me with an advance copy. In the report, they have modelled 4 scenarios and the predicted impact on the economy output for the arts and West End in the the arts and culture in the West End. Scenario 1 is repeated lockdowns. Scenario 2 is strict rules and social distancing in place. Scenario 3 is seasonal COVID with occasional softer social distancing remaining. And finally, scenario 4, which is a return to normality, which I think we all wish for. For the arts and cultural sector, scenarios 1 and 2 is modelled to have very similar outcomes. Employment in the sector in the West End would fall by 95% by 2024. Even in the best circumstances, a return to normality, the arts and cultural sector is projected to produce only 10% less in 24 than in 2019. These models do make for challenging reading, and I would strongly encourage the Minister and her officials to read the report in detail. Venues in my constituency have worked incredibly hard to find solutions to open under current social distancing measures. The Barbican Centre in the City of London has been trialling a new approach to concerts with its Live from Barbican series, involving 300 socially distanced audience members in the hall, alongside a pay-per-view live stream that enables audience to watch from wherever they want to. I am delighted to report that these concerts have sold out, and there are encouraging interest and early sales for live streaming. In the West End, Andrew Lloyd Webber has undertaken heroic action to introduce measures to prove that theatres can be socially distancing friendly at a capacity that works for safety and for commercial viability for his theatres. So what can we do in this place, and what can the government do to support this sector back to return to normality scenario? I paid huge gratitude to the Culture Secretary and his team at the DCMS, including the Minister present, who I know have worked tirelessly since lockdown to support the arts and cultural sector. I recognise their huge achievement in securing the £1.5 billion support for the arts. But there is more to be done if we are to secure our arts and culture sector once we have beaten this dreadful virus. I would encourage the government to continue funding jobs in sectors which remain unable to recover because of restrictions in place. As these businesses remain closed due to no fault of their own, they will likely lose all access to current support measures when the furlough scheme ends. The sector has been hugely grateful for the support so far, but it does need to continue. I would ask that the Minister persuade the Treasury once again to reassess the support it offers the self-employed, as many in the sector are freelance and work in a mixture of self-employed and employed roles, depending on their contract and the employer. Too many have gone without any support at all. Current government support has been more focused on salaried staff, and there is a worry that freelancers will drop out of their profession and there will lead to a shortage of expertise when we are back up and running. I think all of us in this hall accept that theatres, live music and cultural venues do need clear signposting as to when they will be able to open. Theatre productions, for example, have lead times often in excess of 6 months before opening, so require as much notice as possible. I would also urge the government to extend the VAT reduction of 5% for at least 3 years, in line with the DCMS Select Committee's recommendations. Finally, Mr Chairman, and perhaps most importantly, the introduction of a government-backed insurance scheme for live music, theatre and performance to allow venues, producers and creatives to proceed with developing projects in confidence that should that not be able to proceed, the government will support them. We've launched a similar scheme, and a very successful one, for the film industry. And knowing how much a commercial theatre production costs to put on such a huge production, such an insurance scheme would prove beneficial for the whole industry. With that, Mr Chairman, I would like to thank honourable members for joining me to take part in this debate, and I look forward to hearing their contributions and the reply from the Minister.
The question is that this House has considered the contribution of theatres, live music venues and other cultural attractions to the local economy. There will be a speech limit of 3 minutes, and I call Giles Watling.
Thank you, Sir Giles. As always, it's an honour to appear before your chairmanship. This is an important discussion, and I thank my honourable friend from the cities of London and Westminster for securing this debate. Thank you very much. Now, theatres, live music, cultural venues are an essential part of what we are as an island nation. It's what sells Britain PLC to the rest of the world, and I've been heavily involved in it for years. According to the Creative Industries Council, our industry is estimated to support 48 billion in turnover and nearly 400,000 jobs. The building blocks of this national contribution are, of course, the individual local economies. And in Clacton, our local economy is hugely dependent on tourism. It represents some 17.4% of all employment in the area. We have wonderful venues, the Princess Theatre, the Westcliff Theatre, my own Frinton Summer Theatre that I used to run years ago. We also have 19th century Martello Towers, our famous piers, 2 famous piers. We have the beautiful Walton backwaters. We have the Sunshine Coast and the amazing beaches that we have, all of which bring so many people to our wonderful coastal area. And those people take advantage of our tourism offer, and they come to our cultural centres. The tourism in Tendring is worth some £392 million, and to a district like Clacton, that is vital. Now, without strong tourism in Clacton, we would be in real trouble, but that's what we are potentially facing. If we lose the venues and attractions that bring people to our area. Well, yes, we have the Culture Recovery Fund to keep these establishments open, but we now need to create the domestic demand. We need to get people from the UK to come to UK resorts and keep us going. We need to find a way to bring people safely back to the theatres. You mentioned Andrew Lloyd Webber. What a wonderful example. He fogs the Palladium and fills it with alcohol gas and cleans everything up. They have the self-cleaning handles. We must be creative. We are the creative industries after all. Now, we need to get people back into the theatres. But it's not only, as you mentioned earlier, it's the restaurants, the bars, the taxis, all the surrounding ecosystem. So those have got to be supported. And I envisage, like the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, I envisage a voucher scheme that would help people get back into the theatres. And I'd like to put this to the Minister now. There must be some way of creating a way whereby theatres, which would have to operate on a lower percentage in order to keep people safely spaced, could be helped to open with some sort of voucher scheme. And I'm sure that's not beyond the wit of man to come up with that. It could be something to do help with the food offer as well in our local restaurants around the theatres. So we need to start to focus on returning people to these establishments in a safe way. Because if we don't, and when the government's support ends for theatres, then we will be in real trouble. We have a global gold standard in our theatres, and we must protect it. Now, I'd just finally like to say, we've got to say something about the freelancers, the actors, the musicians, the tourists. We've got to make sure that those freelancers are protected, and I put it to the Minister, look after the freelancers too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Walker. And can I congratulate the Honourable Member for the Cities of London and Westminster and tell her how proud I am of her to see her leading this speech today. Not all honourable members will know that I used to teach her at Rada Comprehensive School in Cardiff, and it is wonderful to see her leading our debate here today, and a privilege for me to participate in the debate with her. I'm sorry she ended up the way she did, Mr Walker, but it was despite my best efforts. There we are. But can I also congratulate the Honourable Member, my good friend, the Member for Clacton, who's also a member of the Select Committee, for his speech. He made his constituency, as ever, sound like a wonderful place, although he was unable to establish, as the Honourable Member for Cities of London and Westminster did, that you can actually literally find heaven in her constituency. So can I just say that I always like to stress the importance of the value of the arts and culture, and in and of themselves, as well as the economic benefits. In and of themselves, they're valuable. We should be encouraging it. But nevertheless, it's important to note that places like the Sherman Theatre in Cardiff Central, my honourable friend's constituency for Cardiff Central, make a wonderful contribution, important economic contribution too. And culture and the creative industries contribute £10.8 billion a year to the UK economy, £2.8 billion in taxation, over 360,000 jobs. And it's also the fastest growing section of the economy, and we shouldn't forget that. And, in Cardiff, we have wonderful cultural facilities too. And recently, we had the Womanby Street campaign to try and protect our music venues, which my honourable friend, the member for Cardiff South and Penarth, was very much involved in. We have the wonderful, Millennium Centre in Cardiff, in his constituency of Cardiff South and Penarth, Chapter Arts Centre, a world-leading contemporary arts centre in my own constituency, all of which are wonderful places, but all of which have been very, very badly affected, obviously, by coronavirus and by the lockdown. I will give way.
Thank you for raising the Womanby Street campaign. It's proud to work with him on it. But we also agree that our Welsh Culture Minister, Elena Morgan, has been doing an excellent job in securing the package to support our industries, including freelancers, crucially.
I will say that she's another one of my protégés, actually, and she's doing a marvellous job. She's doing a marvellous job as the Arts Minister in Cardiff, and I thank him for the intervention. But what I want to say, really, to the Minister, and through the Minister to the Chancellor, is that he's got to stop this talk about people in the creative industries, going on and doing something else. I mean, there's a report today on the ITV website where the Chancellor suggested musicians and others in the arts industries may need to retrain and find new jobs. He's talking about actors, musicians, creatives and people like that. He asked whether he was suggesting some of the UK's fabulous musicians, artists and actors should get another job. The Chancellor suggested there is still work available in the creative industries, but said, as in all walks of life, everyone's having to adapt. Well, that's true. That's all very well. But he's in danger of becoming the Aunt Mimi of the government if he isn't careful. Aunt Mimi, for those who don't know, was John Lennon's aunt who brought him up, who told him to get a proper job rather than go into the music industry. These are proper jobs. Being creative, involved in our creative industries, whether you're an actor like my brother is, or like the Honourable Member, or whether you're a musician, whether you're a director, whatever freelance role or employed role you have, these are proper real jobs in the fastest growing sector of our economy. And it's about time the government acknowledge that. Some parts of the government do, in all fairness, and I do welcome the package that the government brought forward previously, although we need to see that money being distributed now. But the attitude that it's not a proper job has got to go, and the Chancellor's got to stop, saying this. And I ask the Minister if she will, she may not feel free and easy in being able to say that here today in the debate, but can she say so privately in the halls of government to stop this kind of talk? Because the government's job here is to provide a bridge to the future for what is a very, very viable creative sector. There is a bright future for it, and for those working in it. We need to acknowledge that, and there needs to be more support to enable it to happen.
In the early 1970s, when I was 7 or 8, I was taken to a performance of Bach, St. John Passion, because my mum was singing in it. And it was electrifying, it was magical, and it changed the course of my life. Because I have to say also, Bob Dylan 8 years later had a similar effect, because great music and great art and great performances, live performances, do change lives. And it's not just the economic cost, as Honourable Member for Cardiff West just quite rightly said. It's not just the economic cost, it's the social cost as well. And particularly, ironically, at a time when there's so much fear and uncertainty and loneliness around, this is the exact time when live performances, when venues are so important to society. Now, just outside my constituency is the Glastonbury Festival site. Some of the far-flung campsites are in my patch, but it brings in, of course, hundreds of thousands of visitors a year, and it supports gazillions of businesses, pubs, hotels, restaurants, catering, transport, you name it. It brings about £45 million a year to Somerset, and businesses are devastated. Many of them are really struggling because, of course, this year there was no Glastonbury Festival. But it's not just the big festivals, there's also smaller venues are affected too. In Frome, the Cheese and Grain is a social enterprise. It's a member-owned organisation, which is a registered charity, and it provides a huge boost to the cultural, economic and social life of Frome. But now they're looking at making 40 out of their 53 staff redundant, and they're, having been closed for 8 months, they're looking at perhaps having to become insolvent. Now, I know the Chancellor's being held upside down and his pockets are being, people are stealing money out of his pockets all the time. But if we don't help these businesses, they really will go under, they will be devastated. I wrote to him and I suggested that we should have a tourism and cultural resilience fund with targeted support and grant to carry these businesses through the winter. And I urge the Minister and I urge the Government to perhaps look at that strongly. Now, I also said the furlough scheme should be extended for those businesses unable to open. And again, I hope that my words are being heard. And I have to say, in the West Country is particularly important because the incidence of COVID is very low, but the economic cost is very high. And I just think that we must keep on changing lives and we must keep on supporting those whose business is changing lives.
Thank you very much. Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Sir Charles. It's a pleasure to be here under your chairmanship, and a pleasure to be in the debate that my fellow West London MP has instigated this afternoon. Well, for one of the smallest London boroughs, Hampstead and Fulham packs a big punch creatively in the arts, theatre, live music, exhibitions, institutions that are the lifeblood of our cultural life, but also a main driver of the local economy. And we've lost some very iconic venues in the last few years, like Hammersmith Palais and the Earls Court Exhibition Centre, but we have Olympia, which is undergoing major renaissance. We have the Hammersmith Eventim Apollo, Shepherd's Bush Empire, three fantastic theatres, the Lyric and the Bush and the Riverside, all of which were thriving before COVID hit and had either new premises or substantially enlarged premises. And we have a lot of really good smaller venues like Bush Hall that's provided live music for 20 years. And these are particularly vulnerable because they don't have good income streams and they don't have reserves of finance, and they are, many of them, in danger of closing down as we speak. The Lyric is consulting on losing about 20% of its staff. None of these institutions, or none of the theatres certainly, are able to stage productions because on a 30% capacity they're unable to make them commercially viable. All of them do excellent community work, and that does not appear to be reflected in the government's funding. And notably, the Arts Fund was directed to prioritise institutions of national or international significance, and that does not cover the whole body of good work these institutions do. Just to give one example, there would have been 45,000 visitors to Christmas shows at the Lyric in Hammersmith Broadway. The Bush Theatre is in one of the most deprived parts of my constituency, and it drives a large part of the local economy there. All of that is suffering at the moment. What do we need, Sir Charles? Well, we do need a tailored support scheme. We need either grants or loans, as is applicable to the type of institution, to keep these institutions going and not going below the waterline over the next year, because it probably is a year. We need support for freelancers. 70% of people who work in this area are freelancers, and that hasn't been true throughout the crisis, I'm afraid. We need insurance, because to put together productions and put them on at the risk of perhaps another lockdown cannot be done unless you have proper insurance schemes. And we need a clarity. We need, because it takes at least 3 months to put together an exhibition or a production of that kind. And we need the government to be able to say, we will support you until lockdown is ended. And so we can do that in the way. It's the only way that we are going to actually achieve something. And without it, I really fear for the cultural sector across my borough, which I care for deeply, but across the country as a whole. And I hope we'll hear from the Minister a response to this.
Thank you very much. Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Sir Charles, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And just to thank my neighbouring colleague in the cities of London and Westminster for securing this really important debate and for her important work on this issue over the last few months. My constituency in Vauxhall is so close to Westminster, and we have a fantastic cultural centre. It contains so many of Britain's iconic cultural institutions, familiar landmarks that to many people around the world. The London Eye, the National Theatre, the BFI along the South Bank Centre, and of course the South Bank Centre itself, whose origins date back to the Festival of Britain. And it also houses the Hayward Gallery and the Royal Festival Hall, the home to the London Philharmonic Orchestra. The South Bank area, my constituency, doesn't only contribute to our culture's enormous identity, but it generates so much income and employment. And my constituents work in a number of these organisations, but the many auxiliary bars, hotels, restaurants and shops that support millions of tourists and visitors every year. These are skilled freelancers and they need our support, the backstage workers. Without them, they would not be able to work and these organisations would not function. And alongside these big, hard-hitting cultural heritage sites, we have smaller but no less important sites, live music venues and theatres, like the Young Vic Theatre and the historic Royal Vauxhall Tavern. And what makes them so special, aside from their cultural importance, is that they are embedded in the communities where they are located. They bring a cultural, economic and social enrichment to the lives of our residents in the form of employment, artistic and creative support programmes. Last month, I had the honour of attending a socially distanced 50th anniversary celebration for the Young Vic Theatre. The Young Vic is an incredible, innovative theatre embedded in schools and in the community. And under the leadership of the inspiring playwright and director Kwame Kwei-Armah, it runs a year-round programme for residents championing diversity and those people who are traditionally underrepresented in the arts and culture. This is so important. But these organisations, from the smaller theatres to the big ones, will continue to suffer under financial challenges of COVID. And we've seen a dramatic footfall in audiences, and in some cases, no audiences whatsoever. Now, many of my constituents who work in the sector will not return to business as usual, even as the lockdown eases, and they will continue to be hit hard. And in July, I welcomed the government's financial support, but it's now October and we haven't seen that money come through. So can the Minister today confirm when the theatres will finally see this money and lobby the Chancellor to ensure that our amazing cultural sector gets the targeted support it needs?
Thank you very much. Mr. Andrew Lewer.
Thank you, Sir Charles, and thank my honourable friend and fellow former council leader for securing this Westminster Hall debate. When I was first elected as the member for Northampton South, one of my hopes and aims was a regeneration of the town centre in both a physical sense, but also in terms of what the town had to offer for those seeking out a cultural experience. And indeed, Northampton has a lot to offer, from the iconic Royal and Derngate Theatre, which I've visited many times now, to the host of historical, archaeological and artistic treasures that can be found at Northampton Museum and Art Gallery. And we're looking forward to that development. Plus the large number of community-run drama projects, historical attractions and music venues that add to that cultural tapestry in Northampton. So I want to thank the Government for the £1.57 billion support package for the sector. Many businesses have been in touch thanking me for that support, but my worry, which is shared by many of them, is that a further package of support will need to be brought in to keep many of our local theatres and attractions open. As Vice President of the LGA, I know that local councils would like government to adopt a place-based approach to recovery by ensuring councils are at the table for discussions, including the new Cultural Renewal Task Force and the Tourism Industry Council. And councils are one of the biggest investors in cultural activity, and they spend around £1.1 billion a year, and they should be part of future discussions. A part of the culture and leisure sector that's often overlooked is the betting and gaming organisations. Now, I've visited both Aspers and Grosvenor casinos in my constituency, and as the lockdown eased, was invited to look at the COVID-safe measures being implemented at considerable costs. Limits on capacity, perspex screens, hand sanitisers and social distancing, so on. I was very impressed by the efforts they'd gone to comply with government guidance, but with the introduction of the 10 p.m. curfew, that's put what it was in any case in these changed times a precarious survival at even greater risk, and I hope the government will look at this 10 p.m. issue urgently, or else I'm afraid that many of them, including those in my constituency, won't survive. That's not to say I'm a great fan of gambling. I just think it's better in a regulated environment for taxation and supporting the vulnerable reasons. I'm grateful for previous government support for these sectors, but as we approach Christmas, the government must look both at how we can safely reopen this vibrant and vitally important sector, but also focus on this. Although many economic sectors will suffer downturns and huge disruption as an overall result of the crisis, there are others that are distinct, that are unable to operate either at all or for practical purposes as a direct result of specific government rules, sectorally or locally, and these have an especial claim to direct compensation or support.
Thank you, Sir Charles. It's a pleasure to serve at your chairmanship, and indeed congratulate the Honourable Lady for securing this debate today. And I want to start by just a message to all of those working in the creative industries, particularly musicians, but also others, and draw attention to my declaration of interest, support from the Musicians' Union. I just want to say this: you are viable, you do matter, and you deserve better, because you are the lifeblood of my constituency, our country, and that's not just economically, but it's to our soul, and we know this, and we all know this in this room today. And I think of the Wales Millennium Centre, I think of the Glee Club stand-up comedy, I think of the theatre and events sector, I think of the amazing film and TV that goes on in my constituency, I think of dance, I think of live music, I think of so many more. crucial for our economy and crucial for our soul. And all of this is devastating for me personally as a singer and performer, as I know many others in this room who've come from the industries, or whether professionally or semi-professionally, will be feeling the same. But it is devastating for my constituents in Cardiff, South and Penarth. Now, Sir Charles, yes, some are adapting. BBC Studios has adapted in a COVID-safe way in Cardiff, South and Penarth. The world-leading Iris LGBT Film Festival is starting tonight virtually, online. That is fantastic. But many others simply cannot adapt in that way, and adapt in a way that is economically sustainable for them and those who work in their industries at the moment. And unfortunately, the response of the UK government has been too slow, it's been too little, and too many are falling through the gaps. One major music body locally has told me in the last 2 days that the Chancellor's declarations around viable jobs are meaningless and insensitive in this context. And I want to draw attention, Sir Charles, to the demands by the Musicians' Union and many others in the sector that not only do we need to get musicians back to work safely as soon as possible, 70% of them currently unable to do more than a quarter of their usual work, get the income that they normally rely on. We need to expand the self-employment scheme. 38% of musicians ineligible for the schemes that the Chancellor set out. But we also need individual support. I will happily give way.
I'm very quickly give way. What is on the point of music? Did he see the protest outside Parliament today by the Let Music Live group, which was where musicians came together to play some Gustav Holst music? And can I also join him in congratulating the work of the Musicians' Union, declare my own interest as a member, and the work of Horace, the General Secretary, and Naomi Pohl, the wonderful Assistant General Secretary.
I totally endorse the comments that my honourable friend has made, and the scenes from outside here today were incredibly powerful. I wasn't able to be there in person, but I saw them online, and I think just showing the scale of devastation in the sector, but also the wish to be able to perform and to be able to do their livelihoods in the way that they would. And we're well aware of the concerns that are affecting individual freelancers in Wales. Indeed, the Welsh Government announced a specific fund for freelancers. I'm told that Arts Council England have told that the money cannot be used to support individual freelancers in England, and I wonder if the Minister can explain why that's the case. And I'm aware, Sir Charles, that there have been some concerns and frustrations in the last 24 hours in my own constituency with being able to get funding from the freelancers scheme in Wales. And I think that shows the huge demand and the desperation that's affecting so many people. And I want to reassure those people who've raised concerns, Sir Charles, that I've been speaking to ministers, I know others have been as well, and we're assured a second phase will be open very, very soon because they recognise the demand is there. But that scheme doesn't even operate in England, Sir Charles. And in Wales, we've seen a total fund of 53 million announced for the arts and culture sector. That's the most significant across the UK. 7 million of that fund ring-fenced for freelancers. I want to end, Sir Charles, by just reflecting on a couple of the heart-rending messages I've received from constituents showing the real human cost here. I had one constituent, a friend, musician, who wrote to me saying, I know many fully professional musicians who are in utter panic. It is their sole livelihood, and it is devastating to see them with distress etched on their faces. He's thinking of leaving this country. We will lose this talent. They will go elsewhere. Another writes to me, I'm leaving the profession. There is no hope. So, Sir Charles, we need to see better from the Chancellor. We see better from ministers, deeply concerned by his comments today where he said, it's a sad time. We can't pretend everyone will be able to do the same job. We all need to do better. We need to do better as a country. We need to support these people through this crisis. At a cost to our economy otherwise, but crucially to our country's soul.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stephen Hammond.
Thanks, Sir Charles. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon and to see the Minister in her place. And I would like to say, like many others, thank you for the package that the government has put in place for the arts sector. And congratulate my honourable friend, the member for the City of London and Westminster. She's right that as London MPs we're extraordinarily proud of the cultural offering our city has and the economic benefit it also gives to this nation. And it would be remiss of me, obviously, to point out it isn't just in central London. In Wimbledon we have the new Wimbledon Theatre, the home of Panto, the best children's theatre, the Polka Theatre in the country, Lantern Arts Centre, of which I'm a patron, and many other small venues. But I'd like to focus my remarks, Sir Charles, this afternoon on the events industry. I first mentioned that back in March in the House the problems that the supply chain and the supply chain into the hospitality industry and the live events industry was likely to have if there weren't support packages in place. It is an industry where you see people who work in that industry, caterers, photographers, events planners, exhibition organisers, AV engineers, musicians, actors, and I could go on, simply have not been able to work at all because events, exhibitions have all been stopped by the pandemic. It's affected this industry, I would suggest, more than most others, and perhaps most of all. And therefore I do think that, as the Chancellor has put in place an extensive package, but there is a good case for looking at this industry. In Wimbledon, and like so many parts, we have extraordinary businesses, viable businesses, White Light, Oxygen. And only yesterday, another events, the MD of another events company from 19 Group wrote to me saying, the sector does not want to go into hibernation, the exact is opposite. And what I'd say, if I may, to the Minister is not that, this, like everybody, they'd like certainty. Like everybody, they want more help in terms of money for jobs. But it's rarely that I agree with the Honourable Member for Hammersmith and Fulham. But he is right that one of the things the government could do would be to put in place a guarantee package that would allow this industry to start having some certainty for planning for events for when we finish COVID, hopefully some stage next year. At the moment, that certainty is not there, and that government guarantee would work. The other thing I'd say, I had a phone call, sorry, I had a Zoom meeting with my constituents, Mark and Judy Faithful, last week. And they were pointing out that DCMS and other government departments have been involved in test events. There was a test business trade exhibition, a test trade event at the Hilton in Canary Wharf in September, a test banqueting event. And can I say to the Minister, what the industry doesn't understand is that other parts of Europe and other parts of the world are looking at the ability to open those test events. Could the government look again at the events they attended, those test events that prove they could be COVID secure, and look to open that up so the industry can thrive?
Charles, once again it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank the member for the cities of London and Westminster for securing this important debate. Now, I am delighted that Coventry is set to become the UK City of Culture in 2021. However, in the run-up to these events themselves, our theatres, live music industries and other cultural attractions have been hard hit by the pandemic, with too little support promised far too late. And concerns raised by people within the arts and culture sector has been ignored by this government. The arts and culture sector in Coventry enriches lives and employs hundreds of my constituents. Now, due to the pandemic, they've rightly closed their doors to the public, but have unforgivably not been supported enough financially by this government to ensure their viability once they open their doors once again. Our theatres, live music venues and other cultural attractions play a big role to our local economy. Not only do they provide jobs to my constituents, but they ensure that other local businesses surrounding them benefit from increased footfall. I would like to pay tribute to community institutions like Imagine Theatres and Belgrade Theatre, who have brought tears of laughter and joy to adults and children alike across Coventry. This is what they do best. And this is not, but there is no such joy for them now, as without urgent care and consideration from this government, my constituents may not have access to theatres to look forward to once this pandemic ends. Both of these prestigious theatres are confronted with potentially 22 months with no income whatsoever, with their productions postponed to 2021. With no income, this government expects them to take back staff from the 1st of November through the Job Retention Scheme. Even then, I wonder if the government can let me know how they expect our theatre business to survive. The sector is facing mass redundancies and many businesses will be bankrupt. How can we expect these industries to thrive post-COVID or be part of rebuilding our society if they are not investing in them now to ensure their viability and to safeguard these jobs? If a better package isn't delivered soon, up to 800 jobs could be lost from these two theatres in Coventry alone, and that's 800 jobs too many. We must do everything we can to support businesses in the arts and culture sector, both in Coventry and across Britain. They are a shining source of entertainment and culture, showcasing the very best of our country. The very viability of this industry post-pandemic will depend upon action, not taken later, not taken if or when it fails, but taken now. I, for one, am willing to work with partners, including this government, to safeguard this sector. Thank you, Sir Charles.
Thank you very much. Andy Carter.
Thank you, Sir Charles. It's a pleasure to appear before you, my first Westminster Hall debate. And I thank my honourable friend, the member for Cities of London and Westminster, for securing this important topic. Now, my son's realisation that we weren't living in normal times came about 2 weeks ago. We were talking about what we were going to do for Christmas. And he said to me, we're not going to be able to go to the pantomime this year, are we? And I said, well, what are we going to do? And he said, well, we're going to And that's something that really struck me. Going to the theatre to watch a live show, especially with children, not only brings families together, it makes everything great about being in Britain. Now, we all know why difficult decisions to pause performances have been taken, but we mustn't underestimate the wider long-term impacts that these decisions will have. Very understandably, a lot of the discussion around theatre world is focused on the West End and major regional theatres like the Opera House in Manchester or the Liverpool Empire. But this debate is also about the contribution to the local economy. And I want to highlight just for a second the contribution that live events have to our sense of community. The Amateur Dramatic Society that uses the Village Hall to put on a run just for 3 or 4 nights. Those AmDrams are the training grounds for future performers, for technicians, everything that will make our vibrant theatre sector just as vibrant for years to come. Now, as I said, this debate is related to local economies, and I want to highlight the impact for Warrington's local economy of the closure of our local theatres. And I'm very grateful to the team at Culture Warrington who've provided me with some real detailed inserts into what's happened in their sector. The Pyramids Arts Centre, the Parr Hall, stayed empty since mid-March. Losses for Culture Warrington likely to top £1 million. And I know they've been able to use some of the government schemes, but sadly redundancies are following. It's not just that performances aren't going ahead. It's that the pre-theatre dinners, the after-show drinks, the wider impact also not happening. Now, I'm very grateful to the Minister and the Secretary of State for the £1.5 billion package that the sector has benefited from. But in recent weeks, I've been particularly struck by conversations with my constituents Dale and Adam Wilson from Great Sankey, father and son who own WH Leisure, a sound and lighting company, which in normal times would be distributing and setting up equipment all over the country right now. They need additional support through the months when, frankly, they would have been making the money that keeps them afloat for the slower periods next year. With venues closed, we know that thousands of highly skilled technicians who work behind the scenes, who actually put on the shows, can't return to work. And these are the people we need to offer additional support to. Their jobs will return once the government allow performances to return.
Johnson.
Thank you, Sir Charles, and it's a pleasure to see serve under your chairmanship. I have the honour to represent Liverpool Riverside, covering the city centre and the World Heritage Status waterfront, which attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors in a normal year. There are 5 art galleries, 4 museums, including the International Slavery Museum, the only museum in the country dedicated to the history of the transatlantic slave trade. You will see in our streets a list of buildings and shows and films. In 2017, 289 films and TV shows were shot, contributing over 111 million to our local economy. We have 5 theatres, including the Everyman and Playhouse, 2 large arenas, and music venues too many to count. Liverpool is not UNESCO City of Music for nothing. And we might be synonymous with the Beatles, but the city has a rich and diverse music history that reaches back to the 18th century. Our Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra is the UK's oldest continuing professional symphony orchestra, which marks its 180th anniversary this year. We are a city that leads culturally from the Merseybeat sound to Eric's and the punk scene in the 70s and 80s to the global clubbing brand Cream. We are home to the annual Africa Oye, the largest festival of African music in the UK, and the Liverpool International Music Festival, which was the largest European music festival in 2018. And Liverpool has gone from strength to strength since its capital of culture days in 208. Doubling its visit numbers and becoming synonymous with cultural innovation and creative excellence. We have a thriving independent sector, and when our city does culture, it does it big, it does it loud, and it draws people in. You only have to view the numbers who visited our giant spectacular. Liverpool boasts around 68 million visitors annually, bringing over 5 billion to the city region and creating 57,000 related jobs. Or it did until COVID-19. And what was a booming sector is now facing a serious threat to its existence. And while the additional Culture Recovery Grant funding announced earlier this year by the Chancellor was very welcome, It's short-term, stopgap, a sticking plaster on a gaping wound that doesn't address the looming funding crisis for many of our arts and cultural venues. Liverpool is now under further local restrictions which will severely limit visitor numbers, posing a significant threat to their sustainability. At the heart of our famous and rightly celebrated Scouse culture are people, performers, actors, musicians, producers, technicians, support staff, and they are what makes Liverpool's culture sector punch above its weight. I'd just like to end with a quote that says, if art is to nourish the roots of our culture, society must set the artist free to follow his vision wherever it takes him. And that means financially supporting all of our artists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Sir Charles. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for the Cities of London and Westminster, for securing this debate. She represents the West End, the national showcase for the world-leading UK theatre industry. However, it's an industry that extends throughout our 4 countries, and it is important that these roots are nurtured so as to ensure that the industry does not wither away. In Waveney, there are 5 main theatres which complement each other well and are deeply embedded in their communities. The Marina in the centre of Lowestoft with its 800-seat auditorium. The Players' Theatre at the nearby former Bethel Church, run by the Lowestoft Players, one of East Anglia's premier amateur theatre groups, for whom I am an ambassador. The Seagull Theatre in Pakefield, the Fisher Theatre in Bungay, and the Public Hall in Beccles, which are all run by volunteers. I shall briefly outline, Sir Charles, why these theatres are so vitally important in the area. Firstly, they are crucial to the future of our town centres, which are facing enormous pressures and which are undergoing dramatic change, not only as a result of COVID, but also due to the fast-changing face of retail. Secondly, these theatres are doing so much great work in the community. The Seagull run dementia classes and engage with care homes and schools, as do the Marina, who in 2019, in addition to performances, clocked up over 5,000 engagements with their community outreach work. Thirdly, they nurture talent and enable people of all ages and all backgrounds to fulfil their dreams and to realise their full potential. In 1953-54, Sir Michael Caine spent a year in Lowestoft in Rep at the Arcadia, which is now the Hollywood Cinema. Finally, we must not forget what goes on backstage. The UK theatre has a well-established, world-leading supply chain, which cannot function when there are no performances. In Lowestoft, scenic projects design and build sets and scenery, which they then transport around the country. The theatres in Waveney are getting out and helping themselves. The Marina have launched their survival fund, and the Fisher Theatre and the Beccles Public Hall will be putting on socially distant pantomimes, Raiders of the Lost Panto and Inside the Snow Globe. Nevertheless, COVID-19 has stopped them all in their tracks. The Cultural Recovery Fund is welcome, but the money needs to be got out quicker and get right across the country. Moreover, more support is required, as my honourable friend, the member for Clacton, has articulated in his role chairing the APPG for theatre.
Thank you very much. And Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Sir Walker, and it's a pleasure to speak under your chairmanship, and I thank the honourable member for securing this important debate. The Minister would have heard me speak last week when I was very proud to hold an adjournment debate on grassroots arts and culture in my hometown of Luton, where I'm proud to represent. Our creative sector promotes community cohesion, develops social capital and fosters happier, healthier lives. And like many others who have spoken, so much of our culture takes place in our town centres, and it's why it's so important that we must secure the vibrancy of our cultural sector once more. And I'm proud in Luton South that Luton Town Centre since 2018 has had its purple flag status, which means that it is safe, diverse and enjoyable to enjoy a night out in arts and culture. And like others today, I was also infuriated by the apparent display by the Chancellor of contempt for those working in the creative sector by stating that musicians or other artists should get another job if they're struggling due to coronavirus. Yesterday, I was contacted by many local pubs and music venues who are saying there is demand for live music, they want to operate safely, and we must try what we can to save that. We all enjoy and consume art every day as it has numerous social and economic benefits. And people working in the creative sector should not be left excluded and their role in society deemed unviable. And again, last week I was proud to take part in the We Make Events demonstration outside Parliament, supported by Bec2 and Equity, because it is such a vibrant and important sector to all our lives. These are viable sectors and they will be important after the pandemic and will play a crucial part in building back better. And therefore they must receive support. We can't afford these skills to be lost. This weekend I had the best and the worst of it. The best was that I went back to the Hat Factory in Luton and watched live theatre. In a 100-seat theatre, there was 21 of us, but we were socially and we were COVID secure, and it was great to see the staff so proud to open their venue again. But the same weekend, I had the worst of it, with Cineworld announcing tens of thousands of jobs being lost, including those in the Cineworld in my town centre. That is terrible news, and I've already had constituents get in touch because they've just been laid off with so little notice. I've mentioned before to the Minister that Luton is a brilliant case study of how embedding culture in a local area's growth strategy could provide a basis for building back better. Our programme last year of Culture, People, Power, Passion employed 84 artists and trained 13 young people from diverse backgrounds. That is something to be proud of in our town, and I will again extend and make sure I write to the Minister to invite her to visit Luton and our cultural offer.
Thank you very much. Alison Pulis.
Thank you very much, Sir Charles. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair. And I'm very proud to speak up for Glasgow Central and the cultural offer that we have, which is absolutely renowned, and it is also a UNESCO City of Music. And I want to talk a little bit about the many people that work in the creative sectors, both in the limelight and behind the scenes. And as the band Ash tweeted earlier, they said it's not just the musicians, though, is it? It's our technicians, our engineers, our management, our agent, our promoter. It's the venues, their staff, the production companies, transport, storage. It's roughly 1 million people that you're throwing out of the job market by not supporting this industry further. And I would add to that the restaurants, the bars, the hotels, and all of the people that work there as well. It's an entire local ecosystem at risk without further support, and that in a sector worth £11 billion to the UK economy. And some of the comments that have come out from the Chancellor and from the Treasury have been quite hurtful to many people in terms of the role of people within those sectors. So I'd like to read a comment from one of my constituents, Jazz Hutsby. He says, "My partner and I are freelancer within live events and the arts. To call this a career would not describe what our jobs mean to us. We've dedicated our lives to our practice. We train specifically for this role. We are specialists in our field and make no doubt that we do not need to get better jobs or to upskill. What we need is effective support." The rhetoric from Westminster over the last week has frankly been disgusting. Our vocation, our lives have been deemed unviable. This was, as I'm sure you're aware, literally what the Chancellor suggested. And I would say to the Minister, this was before the comments on ITV earlier today. There is so much more that Jazz points out that needs to be done to support this sector by all governments and by local governments. And I would seek to pursue these issues with whoever can help them. I want to talk a bit about the events and conferences sector, particularly because I have the Scottish Events Campus in my constituency of Glasgow Central, and they employ over 200 people, with additional people that come in for those events as well. Exhibitions are worth over £11 billion to the UK economy, but they and their suppliers have little or no support, and the ending of furlough could mean unemployment for around 114,000 people in the exhibition sector, which is completely avoidable if the government chose to support this sector. It is viable, it will be viable, and it just needs that bridging to get to that point. There have been further job losses announced as well in Cineworld and potentially in Odeon as well, which affects my constituency. And I want to talk lastly about the museums sector. And Museums and Galleries Scotland have pointed out that as of last week, only 160 of Scotland's 423 museums and galleries are open. That's 38%. And this may be a high point for the year as well as we go into winter and some have to close down for that. Some museums can't open because they don't have the capacity to do so safely, because social distancing makes their business model unviable, because their staff have been redeployed, or because their volunteers are just too vulnerable to come back in. And the Association of Scottish Visitor Attractions found that only 28% of attractions that have reopened are opening at an economically sustainable level. Sir Charles, we need these sectors. We need these sectors to survive for all of our health, our well-being, the cultural joy that we draw from these things. And the government needs to get its finger out and provide that as extra support to see them through the winter.
Well, thank you very much. Great discipline from backbench colleagues and 2 no shows. So the front benches each have at most 11 minutes, which leaves the mover of our debate 2 minutes at the end. I call Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Sir Charles, and I don't intend to take up 11 minutes unless I've intervened on several times. But it is a pleasure to see you in the chair, and I'd congratulate the local MP for securing this important debate. And I think she set out the stark statistics and various issues facing the creative sectors very well. And there have been some fantastic speeches this afternoon. I don't have time to touch on them all, but I think but the honourable member for Cardiff, in fact, both honourable members for Cardiff are no longer in his place. Their point about the Chancellor and his attitude towards those who work in the creative... apologies, he's lurking behind me. We can do the panto bit now, yeah. But their point about the Chancellor's attitude to those who work in the creative sector was a point very well made, and a point that I would very much concur with. And also agree with the honourable member for Warrington South when he mentioned the importance of panto. I know my children are would ordinarily be very much looking forward to Paisley's Pace Youth Theatre panto this coming Christmas, which sadly will no longer take place. And of course, the contribution from that great, from honourable friend, the member for Glasgow Central, that great Renfrewshire commuter town that lies to the east of my constituency, who made some fantastic points, particularly about the Scottish Events Campus and others, which I frequent often. But as we enter the fag end, I like to call it, of 2020, it's been that sort of year, and we look to put a pretty desperate year behind us. We should, if there were any justice in this world, Sir Charles, be looking forward to Paisley celebrating its tenure as UK City of Culture 2021. Now, I've never spoken again to the Economic Secretary to the Treasury since he, as a DCMS Minister, announced Coventry as the winner of that competition. But in all seriousness, I do wish Coventry well in 2021. I'm sure that despite the difficulties presented by the situation that we all face at the moment, they'll deliver a fantastic and impactful programme and secure a great cultural, economic and social legacy from it. But that word, culture, still elicits a curious response from many. Culture is for everyone, but many still instinctively think of highbrow sophistication, snobbery and elitism at the opera or the theatre. It's a long-held but unfair reputation. You're just as likely to sit next to a snob at a stand-up comedy gig, as I did at the Stand in Glasgow the last time I was there, as at the opera. And I should say, in case anybody's thinking that I'm doing Opera Down, in my stint as the branch fundraiser, one of the more risky events but which ended up being one of the most successful and enjoyable events that the Renfrew SNP ever held, was an opera concert at Renfrew Town Hall. But the truth is that culture, in whatever form it is, enriches us all, individually or collectively, whether it's live music in stadiums, village halls or the pub, theatre, including panto, and opera and theatres big and small, stand-up comedy, and of course museums and galleries.
Will you give way?
I will give way.
Missing from his long list has been ballet, of course, and Scottish Ballet are based in my constituency, and does he share my sadness that their Christmas productions won't be going ahead as normal this year? And unless there is further support from the government, there might not be theatres there for them to host their productions in the future.
I thank my friend for that intervention. Of course, how remiss of me to forget ballet, particularly as my daughters are both dancers themselves, but she makes a very good point. I hope the Minister was listening to it. But in many of these sectors, the people who derive a livelihood from them, be they performers or staff who facilitate and assist the performance, are in severe financial peril. Of course, the Scottish Government have acted, whether the UK Government would not or before the UK Government when it did. The Scottish Government were proactive and announced a £30 million Creative, Tourism and Hospitality Enterprise Hardship Fund, and £10 million has been provided to protect vital performing arts venues, with an additional £59 million announced in August. But we need the UK Government to step up. One just has to look at, as others have mentioned, the announcement by Cineworld of 5,500 people losing their jobs as the chain mothballs itself until the spring. This decision just proves the inadequacy, utter inadequacy of the so-called job support scheme. The Chancellor says the scheme exists to provide viable jobs. So does the Minister not think that cinema and the jobs they support are no longer viable? Of course they are. These are the sorts of jobs that any job support scheme worth its salt should be protecting. There's also the 125,000 jobs supported by concerts in the AV and event sector, with companies like AdLib and FE Live in my constituency, without whom concerts just couldn't be delivered. And whilst on the subject of supporting those who earn their livelihood from the sector, let's turn to the self-employed, which many have mentioned, who represent a large number of workers in the creative industry. And due to the preponderance of freelance actors, performance of technicians, etc. But Charles, we've heard today from members across the Chamber that the Chancellor's support for the self-employed is simply not enough. Not only is the level of financial support not enough people qualify for support either. Whilst the UK Government has failed to help these people, the Scottish Government has provided £185 million of targeted support for SMEs and the self-employed, and £5 million for creative freelancers specifically. But the Chancellor must rethink his approach here, or a great many people across the UK are going to face a long and difficult winter. Creative industries in Scotland account for 70,000 workers and 15,000 businesses, and are estimated to support around £9 billion of activity within the wider Scottish economy, contributing £5.5 billion to Scotland's GDP. Edinburgh, of course, has its world-renowned festival and Fringe. The Fringe alone provides 3,000 jobs and £173 million for the Scottish economy. So we absolutely recognise the vital role played by creative businesses which employ tens of thousands in Scotland. The UK Government focus on financial viability alone ignores, as others have indicated in their contributions, the true value of the industry and other industries. Local live music venues provide meeting places and community hubs, and cultural events such as the Edinburgh Fringe elevate global awareness of Scottish and British arts and culture. Not only that, it brings cultural entertainment from all over the world to our doorstep. The cultural sector is vital for preserving our national heritage and connecting people. Its preservation is more important than mere economics. But of course, the vast majority of Scots' cultural engagement and entertainment is not found at the Edinburgh Festival, but in our communities, towns and cities the length of the country. 93% of the grassroots venue network faces permanent closure, 93%, and 34% of musicians are considering abandoning the industry completely. These are stark figures, so I'm glad that the £2 million plus grassroots music venue stabilisation fund was announced by the Scottish Government. And one of the recipients of that Lifeline grant was the Bungalow in Paisley, which is a well-known venue and a community interest company, which for the past 40 years or so has put every musical genre from up-and-coming talent spanning punk to big band jazz on its stage. And Bungalow co-director Tommy McGrory said that this money is our lifeline. Without this money, we would find ourselves in a very serious position. We have just been limping on. And it must be said, Sir Charles, that the Scottish Grassroots Music Fund is in relative terms 6.5 times the size of the UK Government's comparable scheme for England. It really must do more for this vital sector. Now, I have a relatively broad, despite what my colleagues might think, I have a relatively broad cultural taste. But to be honest, it's the grassroots venues, be it live music or stand-up comedy, that I really miss. Even some out with my constituency, like the 180-year-old Gellens Bar in Inverness, the city's oldest venue, with bands like Schehallien featuring amongst the 650 gigs played at the venue in a normal year. Live music is absolutely critical to venues like the Bungalow and the Gellens Bar, and for as long as clinical advice continues to ensure that no indoor live music or comedy can be performed, the venues and the performers themselves must be supported. Now, I mentioned in my opening remarks that Paisley was robbed of the City of Culture Award, and it should be warming up to embark upon its 2021 programme with the 9th year of the Spree Festival, an extremely popular and growing celebration of music, arts and comedy, which should have kicked off this very Thursday. But sadly, just another event cancelled due to the pandemic. But it's fair to say that the bid itself will leave a legacy for years to come in the town. £22 million being spent on plans to preserve Paisley's Town Hall's place at the heart of life in the area and turn it into a landmark performance venue, and £42 million on the transformation of Paisley Museum into an international class destination telling the story of the town's pattern, heritage and people. Now, I very much look forward to these great venues reopening, but I sincerely hope that when they do, that Renfrewshire hasn't lost many of its grassroots and small venues, for that would amount to a Pyrrhic legacy. But to conclude, Sir Charles, the SNP Scottish Government has supported the creative industries but would like to do more. To do so, it needs the financial powers or funding to do so. The UK Government has tools at its disposal. As others have mooted, it could extend the 5% cultural VAT rate on tickets in line with the DCMS Select Committee's recommendations, and it could provide a government-backed insurance scheme to provide the music industry with the necessary confidence to reopen. But whatever it chooses to do to support reopening, it needs to act now to deliver further support for these vital businesses so that the Scottish Government can use the consequentials to support the Scottish creative and cultural industry. They must act now, or the damage of collapsed businesses and lost talent may be irreparable.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Walker, Sir Charles. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank the Honourable Member for the Cities of London and Westminster for bringing this important debate today. And there is nobody more passionate advocate for the West End than the Honourable Member opposite. And also, isn't it delightful to be back in Westminster Hall, having proper debates? And I can't tell you how grateful I am for everybody putting in for this debate, because you can see across all parties everybody in this debate really cares about the cultural sector, the cultural industry. And it may be, like the member for Clacton, it's people who have worked in that industry, like myself, for 3 decades as a freelancer, as an actor and writer. It may be that there are people who are musicians, like my honourable friend, who is a fantastic musician, and I urge everyone to buy his albums. But it's also maybe that your children are also interested in the arts. And we all know the impact that the arts have on our own communities for well-being and also for tourism and so on. Obviously, we are in a really difficult time at the moment, but I just want to go through a couple of areas where I think great points have been raised around the event sector. The member for Wimbledon talked about the tests being done. Can we see those tests be rolled out and open up? Because the event sector feels absolutely abandoned and left to one side. Also about community and how mental health is really supported through the work that is done in communities. And certainly Luton South, my honourable friend, talked about the work done there. And Hammersmith, I know the work done in Hammersmith is about equality, inclusion and diversity. My concern very much is that when we do get our sector back on its feet, that work will be the low-hanging fruit that we'll lose across the whole piece. That work with communities and schools and bringing on new writers from diverse communities, it's really vital that work is not cut as we try and survive. Pantomime, the first chance most young working-class kids get to go in a theatre. The concern for pantomime from the honourable member from Waveney, Warrington South. There was a great demonstration of the Panto Parade last week. You'll have seen a lot of the freelancers in their pantomime dame costumes, and the dedication that they give to their sector is really, really a joy to behold. Obviously, we have Vauxhall in the Young Vic. I am so excited about the work that they're doing there and also their anniversary. Our museum sector, my honourable friend, the member from Liverpool Riverside, absolutely, we all know when we go to Liverpool, that vibrancy and that energy that you get just from being on the streets, because you know the music, the passion for culture is at every corner. Also, there was concerns about councils' involvement and how we should support councils. And theatres and music venues as our civic centres. The member for Northampton South saying that the council is one of the biggest investors, and that's absolutely true. And certainly tourism, we can't get away from that majority of our communities, tourism is absolutely held up by our cultural offer. My friend from the Theatre APPG talking about Clacton, and also the voucher suggestion, the seat out to help out. Any support that we can get for our theatres regionally to open would be welcome. And of course, let's not forget the issue around freelancers. My friend, the member for Cardiff South and Penarth, I mean, you more than the member more than others will know, with the BBC being in your constituency, actually the BBC is held up by limited company freelancers, PAYE freelancers, creative freelancers who come in and out for shows. So they really do need our support. And also the member for Glasgow Central has done so much work raising this issue around the excluded and freelancers. So I think it's something that I know that the Minister, the Minister has shown great dedication in this area, and I know that whilst the Chancellor has clarified his statements that he made to ITV, saying it wasn't specifically about musicians, I do think, as you've heard this afternoon, there is a sense that the creative industries do feel misunderstood, and they're going to be the last to come back and the least supported. And I think, you know, the sense that they're not viable or that they could retrain, when certainly, as we know, musicians spend all their life, day in, day out, learning their musical instrument, then to be told to become a care worker instead. We know that that will only lead to poor mental health, depression, because they're not doing the thing that they're trained for. And I know that the Minister is assiduous, and I'm sure she will take that back to the Chancellor, that what was said on ITV has impacted us all and deeply upset the industry, that they don't feel that the government gets its value. So we all want to see our venues get back to that normality. We've heard today the impact that they make financially. We also have heard the cultural hub in a community in terms of visitors, in terms of support for local restaurants, taxi firms, employment, and our local economies more widely. And certainly, as we saw during the summer months, the restrictions were easing and we got a sense of positivity. We were quite excited. But that, unfortunately, with local restrictions, it seems unlikely to be flourishing in that way. The schemes that the government brought in, which are very welcome, the furlough scheme, the self-employed income support scheme, I'm very grateful, and I know other honourable members and members are, that has also been extended, but it's been extended in a way that actually makes it impossible to use, because how does a venue that can't open then contribute to a workforce's salary, which is why, sadly, we've just heard today, haven't we, about the RSC potentially laying off hundreds of their staff, which will be devastating for them and their communities. And also, we have heard from the sector that the delays in this money, the Cultural Recovery Fund, is bringing great anxiety. And I do thank the Minister for her letter, which I received today, regarding my concern around the crown jewels. And, you know, in my mind, the crown jewels are our community offer, as well as the West End. And the ecosystem that the West End needs, those regional theatres and those community venues, we are all intertwined. There is you push over one domino and the rest of the dominoes will fall. So it's really important that that money doesn't just go to the creative, to the crown jewels. And certainly, when I put a call out on social media for freelancers to tell me their experience of what's happening, I mean, maybe I was slightly foolish because my inbox exploded and I got over 4,000 responses, and actually from people I know and care about, couples for whom they've both lost all their year's work and they still have childcare costs and a mortgage, and they're leaving the sector. And certainly we've seen from the Musicians' Union, a third of musicians are thinking of leaving the sector. The support for freelancers could not be more needed, and certainly the numbers from Cineworld, 5,500 workforce. I mean, it's a tsunami of job losses, and the training isn't there to retrain. We have to get the support there as fast as possible. So in the time I have left, I've just a number of questions that I hope the Minister will be able to advise me on in her response. So my understanding, I've a culture committee of people in the sector, and this morning we had a meeting, and my understanding, there is still no news of who has the money. And if the Minister can explain what is the delay about, what date will the successful organisations receive their funding, and also there is a number of organisations that didn't apply for funding because of the restrictions that, for example, in order to show that they've tried everything to stay afloat, i.e. Firing all their staff, or they couldn't show that they could spend all the money from government by March the 31st, with stage 5 now being kicked further into the year, does that mean that criteria has changed? And does that mean that those organisations that originally didn't apply because they didn't fit the criteria will now have an opportunity to apply? I think clarity around that would be absolutely extremely helpful. What were the total number of organisations who applied, and what was the total amount of funding applied for? And in order for concerts and theatre to return with confidence, we really need an answer on the insurance. And I know I asked the Minister this question in DCMS questions. She wasn't able to give me that answer. I'm sure there are lots of conversations going on with Treasury. We have insurance for film and TV, and that's why we're back up and running. So what does the Minister know about the negotiations that are happening around insurance? Can she at least give us a chink of hope around the insurance? Have the applications for loan supports been greater than expected? If so, will costs for additional loans be taken from other funding pots? Could the Minister explain the 10 p.m. curfew that applies to music venues, not theatres? What evidence can she share with us that the 10 p.m. curfew is going to save lives? In order to reopen venues, venues have to spend money on COVID safety costs. Will they get that money back, even if they don't get money from the ACE funding? Is there a contingency fund in place to support venues to reopen but have to close again? What frameworks in place to support local authorities and metro mayors to work together to support those who need it? Also, finally, I was surprised to learn the Cultural Task Force has been wound up for now. Could she elaborate as to why that is? Is there a feeling that the job is now done? I'm looking forward to hearing from the Minister. Thank you.
And the Minister has a lot to get through. Will the Minister leave 2 minutes for our proposer of the debate at the end, please?
Thank you very much, Sir Charles. It's a great pleasure to serve under your fantastic stewardship and to be back in Westminster Hall. I'd like to start by congratulating my honourable friend on for cities of London and Westminster on securing this really vital debate and for presenting her case so articulately and for everyone else that's taken part in this. I feel like I've been on a whistle-stop tour up and down this country as some of the marvellous and magnificent arts and cultural venues that we celebrate from Liverpool to Lowestoft, from Clacton to Glasgow. We are world renowned for our incredible arts and cultural sectors, and we're very lucky to have great champions from up and down our nations to support them here. And I'd also like to thank the Honourable Lady from Batley and Spen, actually. She I must put on record that she is always very pragmatic and supportive in the way that she approaches her role and asks legitimate questions. And I'm going to try and answer most of them, but any that I don't get to today, I will, of course, write to her with the answers. But this is a terrible time, and it is really important to work as constructively and cooperatively as we can to support these sectors which we care so passionately about. Sir Charles. It's been evidenced today by what people have said that our cultural and creative sectors are one of the UK's greatest success stories. I think we are in this all singing from the same hymn sheet. In so many, the Honourable Lady speaks on behalf of her London constituency, as do many others, but actually up and down the country, they are the actual heart of an ecosystem. She talked about the codependence between West End theatres and live music and venues and museums and galleries, and the health of the hospitality sector, including the hotels, bars, restaurants, shops, taxis, and of course the nighttime economy. And that's a situation that is reflected up and down the country, Sir Charles, with a theatre or gallery offering an actual cultural heart to a community. The Honourable Lady from Vauxhall, who I think is no longer here, said that in so many cases cultural institutions were embedded in the heart of a community and driving economic prosperity to a range of other sectors that support or surround them. The Honourable Gentleman from Cardiff West very kindly invited me to articulate my commitment to those who work in this sector, and of course I am very proud and committed to do so. These are proper jobs. These are jobs that are vital. These are jobs that can do something that very few others in this world can do. They can not just entertain but educate, they can lift spirits, they can improve mental health and well-being, they can take us to places we've never been, open our eyes to the world around us and genuinely offer young people from in some of the most difficult and disadvantaged backgrounds a glimmer of hope as to what they can be and where they can go and what the world could potentially offer them. And I recognise the devastating impact that COVID-19 has had across the arts and culture sector, the impact it's had on the businesses, the staff, the freelancers, those who rely on these sectors, and the many, many others who help make them such a success. Sir Charles, let's get the paper together. As you know, many others have articulated it, the government stands with the culture sector. We're making the biggest ever one-off investment of £1.57 billion, with hundreds of millions of loans and grants due to be allocated in the days ahead. This is in addition, of course, to the £160 million emergency fund that the Arts Council England made available at the outset of this pandemic to those that were struggling over the summer. Now, the Honourable Lady from Coventry North West, I will leave her to pick her own fight with the gentleman from Paisley as to who was the most deserving of the City of Culture. I'm very much looking forward to coming to Coventry to celebrate with her in the years ahead. But she said nothing had been done. But Sir Charles, Coventry alone has had £2,123,690 in support from the Arts Council this year, and of which over 730,000 was emergency funding to support through this COVID crisis, and that's before we've finally allocated the rest of the Cultural Recovery Fund. It is, we are doing everything we can. These funds will be used to help support the performing arts and theatres and museums and heritage and galleries and independent cinemas and live music venues across the country, and we are determined that every region of the UK should benefit. It's also vital that the work of the department is able to continue to support and celebrate those who are so vital to the cultural life of the nations and the communities that they work within. We want this money to go right across England, and that they get the funding as well as that's gone through the Barnett formula, and that this money will help the levelling up agenda. That's why we included this geographical balancing criteria in the fund. I'm pleased that the first funds to be allocated went to grassroots live music through the Emergency Grassroots Music Venues Fund, and to the independent cinemas in the 30 million BFI Independent Cinemas Fund. Of course, our world-beating cultural and creative industries are absolutely nothing without those who work in them. Without those people, they are just buildings. And we know how important protecting jobs and livelihoods in the creative arts sector is. Through the furloughing scheme, we've protected 303,000 jobs with claims totalling 1.47 billion. The self-employed income support scheme was taken up by 64% of eligible arts and entertainment workers, with grants totalling 153 million. Chancellor's announced that this will be extended. The universal credit system has been extended and made more generous, but we know still there are so many people that are falling through the gaps and are not being supported, and I know it's heartbreaking. Sir Charles, I spent my whole child, my father has been in broadcasting for feels like many hundreds of years, but I think it's about 55, and for all of my childhood was a freelancer. I know how stressful that is for a family, and now more than ever. We also know more than anything, the one thing those people want to do more than anything is just actually to get back to work. And the 1.57 billion Cultural Recovery Fund will help to do that. It will help secure the future of the performing arts and live event sector, help to project jobs. But of course they need money in the meantime, and that's why, to complement the government funding, ACE have announced 95 million of additional support for individuals and freelancers. They're also opening another round of the Develop Your Creative Practice £18 million project to help individuals in the arts develop new creative skills. I understand that for some venues, operating with a reduced seating capacity is just not viable at the moment. And I want to see these institutions reopen their doors as soon as it is safe for them to do so. We are working extensively with the sector on how to achieve this. The Honourable Lady asked about the about what sort of committees and cultural hubs there are working on this. We have various working groups that sit under the sort of main cultural board. The working groups have been meeting in some cases weekly since February and continue to do so. So the work on this is by no means done, and it continues very, very regularly. Last week, in fact, I visited the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra at the Lighthouse Theatre in Poole. It just shows you how the dedication and passion of these cultural institutions is bringing our arts back to life. They've enlarged the stage so that the whole symphony orchestra can fit on it and play in a socially distanced way. They've ensured by doing this that their weekly Wednesday night performances have now restarted with a mixture of live, socially distanced, but also live streaming audiences, courtesy of their incredible first-class digital team, and they've already sold 11,500 tickets for those performances between now and Christmas. It's an absolute credit to the tenacity and the talent and the overwhelming determination to bring their magic back to those audiences that utterly depend upon them, and I give them credit, and to those up and down the country who are doing the same. A number of West End theatres have made steps towards reopening. NIMAX, which owns the Apollo, the Duchess, Garrick, Lyric, Palace and Vaudeville, is planning to welcome back audiences with a combination of some previously running shows but also some new stuff, and the National Theatre is preparing their Olivier Auditorium for some socially distanced performances, but it will now be in the round. We are aware that many in the sector would like greater clarity on the potential transition to stage 5, given the planning that they need to remobilise and the lead-in time required for programming and casting and rehearsing. And we've always said that, of course, further opening is going to be dependent on the public health context. We have a venue steering group, which includes representatives from leading sector organisations, as well as Public Health England and other experts, to develop an action plan for maximising activity under stage 4 and for how we proceed to stage 5, which is the silver bullet opening everything up. DCMS will continue to work with the sector to establish an appropriate pilot process for testing and return to stage 5 activity when appropriate, and we're working very closely with the Department of Health and Social Care on their Moonshot programme, Sir Charles. A lot of members have asked about an insurance scheme. We're aware that there are many calls for this, something similar to the one we've produced for the film and TV production. Of course, you have to understand there is a very high bar for intervention in the insurance market. That the way that the film and TV restart scheme that we've introduced was able to work was because it was absolutely the very last barrier. We were 100% clear that access to insurance was the final remaining obstacle to them being able to reopen. And so we're looking at this with regard to theatres now. But if I'm going to intervene, I need to have evidence that it's the only obstacle to be able to get the doors to open again. And so I'm really grateful for the evidence that's been provided. I'm very keen for members and their constituents to keep it coming. And I know that DCMS and HMT colleagues are working very closely together and monitoring the situation for the sector. We want to see fuller audiences returning as soon as possible, but we've always been clear that moving to stage 5 will ultimately be determined by the public health context. We're working at pace with the sector on innovative proposals for how full audiences can return when it's safe to do so. So, Charles, I really hope that I hope that honourable members from around the House are reassured that my ministerial colleagues and myself are absolutely dedicated towards doing everything we can to support this incredibly important sector, one that absolutely does not only makes a difference to people's lives, but actually in some cases saves lives. We are acutely aware of the harm that COVID-19 has done across the whole of the country. We understand the significance that this virus has had on the people and the organisations that make up our globally recognised sectors. I can assure her and other honourable members that we're doing everything we can to help so that when we emerge from this pandemic, our cultural organisations remain ready once again to welcome international tourists, visitors from across the UK and those who live and work here.
Nicky Aiken.
Thank you, Sir Charles. And thank you to all honourable members who took part in this debate today, and to the Minister for her words. It is obvious that she is passionate about the arts and cultural sector, and I take the fact that she is going to look more into the insurance scheme and that we will provide more evidence to her, and that the DCMS are keen to get to stage 5 as soon as it is safe. Hearing everybody speak today, and it was very clear that although I'm a Central London MP, the reason why I wanted to have this debate is because I am clear that this is an issue that affects every single one of us in this House. And it really hit me when my right honourable friend for Warrington South mentioned that his son said he can't go to pantomime this year. And hearing all of you today, it brought back so many memories of going to my first pantomime at the New Theatre in Cardiff with my nan, taking my kids to their first pantomimes at the Hammersmith Lyric and the Wimbledon Theatre, taking my kids to Liverpool to see the fantastic offer there last summer, and taking them to the Tate, and taking my daughter to her first production of Shakespeare at the National. So it has been a real delight for me to hear, but very, very sad. And we've talked about the local economy, but it's also about the health and well-being and the memories that arts and culture provide us all here and our families and our constituencies. And therefore, it is so vital that we continue to campaign to ensure that we can open our arts and culture offer as soon as it is safe to do so. And thank you again for taking part today.
Order, order. Thank you, colleagues. Well done, everybody. That was brilliant. Well done, Minister. That was well done, Tracy. Everybody had a long, it was a lot to do in a short amount of time. I know, it's good.